He trusted his neighbor for 38 years. One drunken confession cost him everything. The price of trust. A story of betrayal, desperation, and justice in Pittsburgh. The autumn rain fell steadily against the windows of the modest brick townhouse on Shady Avenue in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh. Harold Mitchell sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents before him. After 42 years as a senior auditor at the Internal Revenue Service, his career had finally come to an end. The numbers on the final statement seemed almost unreal. His $401K had matured to $312,000. His federal pension lump sum option came to $125,000, and his accumulated savings added, in total, $487,000, the largest sum he had ever possessed at one time. His wife, Margaret, stood behind him, her weathered hands resting on his shoulders. At 67, she still carried the grace that had captured his heart at a church social 44 years ago. Her fingers trembled slightly, a nervous habit she had developed over years of worrying about their future. "Nearly $500,000, Harold," she whispered. "After all these years, we finally have security." Harold nodded slowly, but his brow furrowed with concern. He had spent his entire career examining financial records, witnessing how easily fortunes could evaporate. He had seen colleagues lose their retirement savings when banks failed. He remembered the 2008 financial crisis, when his own brother lost 60% of his portfolio. And just last year, his former supervisor had been swindled by an investment advisor who promised guaranteed returns. "The banks," Harold muttered, shaking his head. "I've seen too much, Margaret. Too many people trusting institutions that failed them. Too many promises that turned to dust." Margaret poured him a cup of coffee. She always added a pinch of cinnamon to the grounds, a trick her grandmother had taught her that made the cheapest coffee taste rich and smooth. "What are you thinking, Harold?" He took a long sip before answering. "Gold. Physical gold. Something tangible. Something that can't disappear with a computer glitch or a bank's bad decisions." Over the next 3 days, Harold researched obsessively. He visited 7 different precious metal dealers across Pittsburgh, comparing prices, checking credentials, reading online reviews. He was methodical, careful, or so he believed. On a crisp Thursday morning in October 2023, he returned home with a heavy leather briefcase. Margaret watched as he opened it on their bed. Inside lay 45 one-ounce gold bars and 30 American Gold Eagle coins, nestled in protective cases. The gold caught the afternoon light streaming through their bedroom window, casting warm reflections across the ceiling. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's our future," Harold replied. "No banker can steal this. No market crash can erase it. It's real." But Harold's first mistake had already been made. In his research, he had focused entirely on the gold itself, its purity, its price, its authenticity. He had neglected the most crucial element, its security. A simple internet search would have told him that home storage of precious metals was one of the riskiest decisions a retiree could make. Insurance companies rarely covered gold stored at home. Anyway, professional vault storage cost only a fraction of a percent annually. And the most common thefts of home-stored gold came not from strangers breaking in, but from people the victims knew personally. Harold chose to store the gold in an old floor safe that had been in the house when they bought it 32 years ago. The safe was embedded in concrete beneath the master bedroom floor, hidden under a heavy oak dresser and a Persian rug that Margaret's mother had given them as a wedding gift. The safe was rusty, its lock mechanism weakened by decades of humidity. Harold told himself it was secure because it was hidden. This was his second mistake. Nobody knows about this except you and me, Harold said to Margaret that night as they lay in bed. Not the children, not our friends, not anyone. That's how we keep it safe. Margaret nodded, already drifting towards sleep. Our secret, she murmured. How? But secrets, like water, have a way of finding cracks. Victor Kowalski had lived in the townhouse next door for 38 years. He and Harold had become friends the way neighbors do in tight-knit Pittsburgh neighborhoods, through shared complaints about property taxes, through borrowed tools and returned casseroles, through the slow accumulation of small kindnesses that eventually feel like kinship. Victor had been an electrician for 35 years before his business collapsed. A major contractor had declared bankruptcy, owing him $47,000. And the domino effect had destroyed everything he had built. Now, at 69, he survived on Social Security and odd jobs, his savings depleted, his dignity frayed. But Victor's true crisis went deeper than money. His daughter, Sophie, had been diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer 18 months ago. The initial treatments were covered by her insurance, but when those failed, doctors recommended an experimental treatment available only at a specialized clinic in Houston. The cost, $175,000, none of it covered by insurance. Victor had tried everything. He had applied for medical loans and been rejected. He had started a GoFundMe that raised only $12,000 before donations stopped. He had sold his truck, his tools, his late wife's jewelry. He had begged the clinic for a payment plan and been told their policy was payment in full before treatment. Every night, Victor lay awake, listening to his daughter's labored breathing through the phone. Every morning, he watched his mailbox for bills he could not pay. And every day, the date the doctors had given him, the point of no return for the treatment, grew closer. It was in this state of mounting desperation that Victor attended Harold's retirement party. The gathering was small, just a dozen neighbors and old colleagues crowded into the Mitchells' backyard on a warm evening in late October. Harold had grilled burgers. Margaret had made her famous potato salad. And someone had brought a cooler full of Iron City beer. Victor stood at the edge of the party, nursing a beer he didn't really want, watching Harold accept congratulations with an awkward smile. They had known each other for nearly 4 decades. Victor had helped Harold install a new water heater in 1997. Harold had driven Victor to the hospital when his wife, Elena, had her first heart attack in 2009. They had shared 100 meals, 1,000 conversations, countless ordinary moments that had woven their lives together. But on this night, something shifted. It was past 10 o'clock when most guests had left. Victor sat with Harold on the back porch, the autumn chill settling around them. Harold had drunk more than usual, 4 beers, then a glass of whiskey that a colleague had brought as a gift. His cheeks were flushed, his tongue loosened. "You know what the best part is, Vic," Harold said, his voice carrying farther than he realized. Margaret had gone inside to clean up, and they were alone in the darkness. "I'm not worried anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm not worried about money." Victor forced a smile. "That's the dream, Harold. That's the whole damn dream." Harold leaned closer, and Victor could smell the whiskey on his breath. "I'll tell you something, but you gotta keep it between us, okay? Just between old friends." Victor nodded. "Of course. I didn't trust the banks," Harold whispered. "So I converted everything. Nearly $500,000. All of it into gold. Physical gold. And it's right here, in my house. Right under my bedroom floor." The words landed like stones in Victor's chest. $500,000 in gold under the bedroom floor. That's smart," Victor managed to say. "Real smart." Harold grinned, clearly pleased with himself. "The banks can go to hell. The stock market can crash. I've got something real, something solid." Victor spent the rest of the evening in a fog. He congratulated Harold again, helped bring some chairs inside, and said goodnight around 11. Walking back to his own townhouse, he could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. $500,000. Enough to save Sophie 10 times over. Enough to pay off every debt. Enough to start again. He pushed the thought away. Harold was his friend. He had known him for almost 4 decades. They had shared grief when Elena died, when Harold's mother passed. They had built a friendship that Victor had believed was real. But as Victor lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he heard Sophie's voice in his head. "Dad, the doctors say we're running out of time." Sleep did not come. Victor's third mistake, or rather, his first sin, was allowing himself to keep thinking about it. Over the following weeks, Victor observed the Mitchells with new eyes. He noticed their routines. Harold's morning walks at 7, Margaret's grocery shopping on Tuesdays, their Wednesday evening church service that lasted from 6 to 8. He noticed when they left town to visit their son in Baltimore, always announcing their trips days in advance, because Harold was incapable of keeping even mundane information to himself. This was Harold's third and most devastating mistake. He had told Victor not only that he had gold, and not only where it was stored, but he consistently broadcast his whereabouts and absences as well. In the weeks after the party, Harold mentioned at least 3 times that he and Margaret were planning a 2-week trip to visit their daughter in Seattle. First week of December, Harold had said, right after Thanksgiving, "We've already booked the flights." Victor wrote none of this down. He didn't need to. The information burned itself into his memory. Each detail a brick in the pathway toward an act he had never imagined himself capable of. On the night of December 3rd, 2023, Victor stood at his window and watched the taxi take Harold and Margaret to the airport. The townhouse next door went dark. The neighborhood settled into silence. Victor did not sleep that night. He paced his living room, arguing with himself, bargaining with his conscience. He thought of Elena, who had believed so deeply in honesty and decency. He thought of Sophie, whose medical fund sat at $14,300, less than a tenth of what she needed. He thought of Harold, who had everything while Victor had nothing. By dawn, a decision had crystallized in his mind like frost on a window. The following Tuesday, Victor made his move. He had selected the timing carefully. Most neighbors worked during the day. The mail carrier came at 11, and after that the street was usually empty until late afternoon. Victor waited until 12:30, then walked casually to Harold's back door. The lock was old and simple. Victor had been an electrician for 35 years, and part of that work had included security systems. He knew locks, knew their weaknesses, knew how a simple tension wrench and pick could defeat most residential deadbolts. It took him 4 minutes to open the door. Inside, the house smelled like Margaret's lavender sachets. The silence was absolute. Victor moved through the kitchen, past the living room with its photographs of grandchildren he had watched grow up, and into the master bedroom. The oak dresser was exactly where Harold had described it. Heavy and old-fashioned, it took all of Victor's strength to slide it aside. Beneath it lay the Persian rug, and beneath the rug, a trapdoor that Harold had never mentioned, but that Victor had guessed would be there. Old houses in this neighborhood often had such features. The floor safe was exactly as Victor had imagined: old, rusty, and vulnerable. The humidity of decades had corroded the lock mechanism. With a pry bar he had brought from his tool shed and 20 minutes of careful work, Victor forced it open. And there it was. The gold gleamed even in the dim light filtering through the curtains. 45 bars, 30 coins, each one representing a piece of Harold and Margaret's life savings. Victor stared at it for a long moment, his hands trembling. He thought of Sophie. He took everything. He transferred the gold into a duffel bag, replaced the rug, and moved the dresser back into position, and left through the back door. The entire operation took less than an hour. Back in his own townhouse, Victor hid the gold in various locations. Some in a false bottom he built into his closet, some in the garage behind a panel he had installed years ago, and 3 bars wrapped in freezer paper and buried in his chest freezer beneath back. Over the following weeks, Victor began converting the gold into cash. He was careful, methodical. The same skills that had made him a good electrician served him now in this darker purpose. He drove to dealers in Cleveland, Columbus, and Erie, never selling more than $15,000 at a time, always paying in cash, always using a different name. By mid-January, he had liquidated enough gold to pay for Sophie's treatment in full. He wired the money to the Houston clinic, and 3 days later, Sophie began her therapy. Victor told himself the worst was over. Why, Harold and Margaret had insurance, surely. They were comfortable. They would recover, and Sophie would live. But Victor had forgotten the most dangerous truth about betrayal. It never truly ends. Harold and Margaret returned from Seattle on December 17th, refreshed and happy from their time with their daughter and grandchildren. They spent the evening unpacking, ordered pizza for dinner, and went to bed early. It was not until Christmas Eve that Margaret suggested they get one of the gold coins to give to their grandson as a special gift. "He's turning 18 next month," she said. It would be something meaningful. Harold smiled at the idea. That evening, after the grandchildren had gone to bed in the guest rooms, he quietly moved the dresser, lifted the rug, and opened the safe. The scream that followed woke the entire household. "It's gone," Harold kept repeating, his face ashen, his hands shaking. "It's all gone. Everything is gone." The police arrived within 20 minutes. Officers examined the house and found no signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no damaged locks, nothing disturbed except the safe itself. "Sir," the detective said, "a patient woman named Harris, who knew about the gold." Harold's face went through a terrible transformation as realization dawned. "My wife. Only my wife." He paused. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. "And Victor, my neighbor. I told him at my retirement party." Detective Harris made a note. "We'll speak with him." But when police questioned Victor the next day, he denied everything convincingly. He expressed shock and sympathy. He said he vaguely remembered Harold mentioning gold at the party, but hadn't paid much attention. He invited the officers to search his home, knowing that the obvious hiding places would reveal nothing, and that the freezer full of frozen vegetables was unlikely to be examined closely. Without evidence, the case went cold. Harold and Margaret were devastated. They had lost their entire life savings in a single stroke. The betrayal was incomprehensible. They refused to believe that Victor, their friend of 38 years, could have done such a thing. There had to be another explanation. Someone else must have overheard. A stranger must have been watching the house. But deep in his heart, Harold knew the truth. He had seen something flicker in Victor's eyes at the retirement party, a moment of calculation that he had dismissed as imagination. He had noticed how Victor's questions about security and travel plans had become more pointed in the weeks that followed. And he remembered, with sickening clarity, how freely he had shared information that should never have left his lips. Harold's fourth mistake was not acting on his intuition. Instead of pressing the investigation, instead of hiring a private detective, instead of confronting Victor directly, he retreated into grief and denial. Months passed. The investigation was officially suspended in March 2024. Harold and Margaret, unable to prove their loss to the insurance company, they had never insured the gold, Harold's fifth mistake, were forced to return to work. At 68, Harold took a part-time job at H&R Block. Margaret began cleaning houses 3 days a week, her arthritic hands aching by evening. Meanwhile, Victor watched from next door, guilt gnawing at him like a rat in his chest. Sophie's treatment was working. The cancer was responding. Every week brought better news from Houston, but Victor could not enjoy any of it. He saw Harold's stoop grow more pronounced, saw Margaret wince as she carried her cleaning supplies to her car, saw the for sale sign go up in their yard as they prepared to downsize to a smaller apartment. And still, Victor said nothing. It was Sophie who finally brought the truth to light, though not in the way Victor expected. In late May, Sophie came home from Houston, her treatment complete, her prognosis excellent. She was thinner than before, her hair still growing back in patches, but her eyes were bright with the gratitude of someone who had been given a second chance at life. "Dad," she said one evening, as they sat on Victor's porch watching the sunset, "I need to ask you something." "Anything, sweetheart." "The money for the treatment. You told me it came from selling the house and your retirement fund. But I checked the records, Dad. You sold the house 2 years ago to pay off debts, and your retirement fund was empty after you helped me with the first round." Victor felt his blood turn cold. Where did the money really come from? Victor opened his mouth to lie, but the words wouldn't come. 38 years of friendship, a lifetime of pretending to be an honest man. A daughter who had survived cancer only to discover her father was a thief. "I did something terrible," Victor whispered. "I did it to save you, but that doesn't make it right." Sophie listened in silence as Victor confessed everything. The retirement party, the gold, the betrayal of his oldest friend. When he finished, she stood up without a word and walked to her car. "Sophie, please. I need time, Dad. I need time to think." She drove away, and Victor sat alone in the gathering darkness, knowing that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Sophie spent 3 days wrestling with her conscience. On the 4th day, she walked into the Pittsburgh Police Department and asked to speak with Detective Harris. The arrest came on June 15th, 2024. Officers arrived at Victor's townhouse with a search warrant. This time, they knew what they were looking for. They found the remaining gold bars in the freezer, 3 1-ounce bars still wrapped in freezer paper, each stamped with the dealer's mark that matched Harold's purchase records. They found the false panel in the garage, empty now, but bearing traces of gold dust. And they found Victor's car GPS records showing trips to dealers in Cleveland, Columbus, and Erie. The same dealers who confirmed selling gold matching the stolen merchandise. Victor did not resist. When Detective Harris read him his rights, he simply nodded. "I knew this day would come," he said. "I've been waiting for it." I've been waiting for it. At the police station, Victor gave a full confession. He described every detail: the retirement party, the months of observation, the break-in, the disposal of the gold. He named the dealers, provided receipts, and explained how he had transferred the funds to the Houston clinic. "Why are you telling us all this?" Detective Harris asked. Victor looked up at her with eyes that had aged a decade in 6 months. "Because my daughter is alive, and because I can't live with what I've done to Harold and Margaret. They were my friends, my real friends. and I destroyed them for my own sake. The trial took place in September 2024. Victor pleaded guilty to grand theft, avoiding a trial, but not the sentencing hearing. Harold and Margaret sat in the front row of the courtroom, their faces masks of grief and bewilderment. Victor's attorney argued for leniency. "My client acted out of desperation, Your Honor. His daughter was dying. He saw no other option." The prosecutor responded with controlled fury. "There are always other options, Your Honor. Medical charities, clinical trial programs, payment plans with hospitals." Mr. Kowalski could have asked his friends. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, studied Victor for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Kowalski, I have read your statement. I understand that your daughter was ill and that you felt desperate. But desperation does not excuse the deliberate betrayal of..." She paused, then continued. "I am sentencing you to 8 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. I am also ordering full restitution in the amount of $487,000. Victor nodded, accepting the sentence without protest. As officers led him away, he turned to look at Harold and Margaret one last time. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." Harold met his gaze. For a moment, something passed between them, the ghost of a friendship that had once been real. Then Harold turned away, and the courtroom doors closed between them. 3 months after the trial, Sophie visited her father in prison for the first and only time. "I'm alive because of what you did," she said through the glass partition. "But I can't forgive you for it. Every breath I take feels stolen now." "Every morning I wake up, I think about Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell working at their age because you took everything from them." Victor listened with tears streaming down his face. "I'm not going to visit again, Dad. I've arranged for your lawyer to have power of attorney over your affairs. When you get out, I'll make sure you have a place to stay. But I can't be your daughter anymore, not after this." She stood to leave. "Sophie, please. You taught me something, Dad. You taught me that love isn't enough to justify anything. You loved me, and you destroyed yourself and 2 innocent people because of it. That's not the kind of love I want in my life." She walked away without looking back. Victor served 6 years of his sentence before being released on parole. In that time, Harold and Margaret sold their townhouse and moved to a small apartment in Wilkinsburg. They never fully recovered their savings. Margaret developed health problems that required expensive medications. Harold worked at H&R Block until he was 73, when his own health forced him to stop. But something unexpected happened in the years after the trial. The story of the stolen gold spread through the Pittsburgh community, and slowly help began to arrive. A local church took up a collection. A former colleague of Harold's organized a benefit dinner. A journalist wrote an article that went viral, and donations poured in from across the country. By 2026, Harold and Margaret had recovered nearly 2/3 of their lost savings. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to live on. More importantly, it restored something that Victor had stolen beyond the gold, their faith in other people. Harold spoke at community centers and retirement homes, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. He never mentioned Victor by name, but the lessons were clear. Never store valuables at home without professional security and insurance. Never share financial information with anyone outside your immediate family. And even then, be cautious. Never assume that friendship protects you from betrayal. The people most likely to hurt you are the ones who know you best. Never let fear of institutions drive you to make decisions that create even greater risks. And never, ever announce your travel plans to people who know where your valuables are kept. Margaret, for her part, found peace in simpler lessons. She started a blog for seniors, sharing the practical wisdom she had accumulated over 70 years of life. Add a pinch of cinnamon to your coffee grounds. It makes even cheap coffee taste expensive. Pour your boiled egg water onto your houseplants. The minerals help them grow stronger. If your hands smell of garlic or onion, rub them with lemon juice before washing. The smell will disappear. Keep a tablespoon of baking soda in your trash can to prevent odors. Never sit with your legs crossed for long periods. It restricts blood circulation and can cause varicose veins. Store your oranges in cold water for an hour before juicing them. You'll get 50% more juice. If you're trying to lose weight, brush your teeth before meals. It reduces your appetite naturally. These small kindnesses, shared freely with strangers, became Margaret's way of healing. She could not undo what Victor had done, but she could create something good from the wreckage. Victor Kowalski was released from prison in September 2030. He was 75 years old, his health broken by years of institutional food and minimal medical care. He moved to a halfway house in Ohio, far from Pittsburgh, far from the daughter who had disowned him, far from the friend he had betrayed. He died alone in that halfway house 2 years later. Among his possessions, the staff found a letter addressed to Harold Mitchell. It had been written and rewritten dozens of times, the paper worn thin from handling. Dear Harold, I have written this letter many times, and each time the words seem inadequate, but I need to try one last time before I die. I was your friend. For 38 years, I was truly your friend. The meals we shared, the conversations we had, the grief we endured together, none of that was false. I loved you and Margaret like the family I had lost. But when Sophie got sick, something broke inside me. I became a man I didn't recognize. I told myself that your money mattered less than my daughter's life. I told myself that you would recover, that you were comfortable, that the loss would not destroy you. I told myself 1,000 lies because the truth was too terrible to face. I was willing to sacrifice your future to save my daughter's present. I was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but morally wrong, spiritually wrong. I learned too late that the ends do not justify the means. I saved Sophie's body, but I destroyed her soul. She carries the weight of what I did every day of her life. She cannot look at herself in the mirror without seeing stolen gold. And I destroyed myself. Not the prison, not the loss of everything I own. Those were just consequences. What destroyed me was the knowledge that I had become exactly the kind of person I had always despised. A liar. A betrayer of trust. You taught me something in that courtroom, Harold. When you looked at me one last time, I saw something I didn't expect. Not hatred, not revenge, just sadness, a deep, profound sadness for what we had both lost. I'm sorry. I will be sorry for the rest of my life, which will not be much longer now. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I have no right to ask for anything. I only ask that you remember sometimes the man I was before desperation turned me into the man I became. Your former friend, Victor. Harold never received the letter. By the time Victor died, Harold himself had passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Margaret holding his hand. The letter was found among Victor's belongings and eventually donated to a local museum as part of an exhibit on financial crimes against the elderly. But the story did not end there. In 2035, Sophie Kowalski, now Sophie Martinez, having taken her husband's name and moved to New Mexico, received a package from a stranger. Inside was a copy of her father's letter to Harold, along with a note from Margaret Mitchell's granddaughter. My grandmother passed away last month. Among her papers, I found extensive writings about your father and what he did. But I also found something else, a list of the people who helped her and my grandfather after the theft. Your name was not on that list, but I think it should have been. My grandmother wrote about you in her final journal. She said that you turned your father in, and that you refused the money you could have kept. She said that you chose honesty over comfort, and that such a choice must have cost you everything. I'm not writing to forgive your father on behalf of my family. That's not my place. But I'm writing to tell you that my grandmother did not die hating him. She died believing that people can be weak and wrong, and still, somehow, be redeemed. She said that your choice proved it. I hope this letter finds you well. I hope you have found peace. Sincerely, Emma Chen. Sophie read the letter 3 times before setting it down. Then she went outside to her garden, where her 2 children were playing in the afternoon sun, and she watched them for a long time, thinking about guilt and grace and the complicated inheritance of love. Far away, in a small cemetery in Pittsburgh, 3 graves lay side by side. Elena Kowalski, who had died believing her husband was a good man. Harold Mitchell, who had died knowing the cost of misplaced trust. And Margaret Mitchell, who had died still. Victor Kowalski was buried in Ohio, alone, under a stone that bore only his name and dates. But sometimes, late at night, the groundskeeper swore he could hear someone weeping. And in the end, perhaps that is the truest lesson of all. The price of betrayal is not measured in dollars or years. It is measured in the silence of the people who can no longer speak to us, the letters that are never received, and the forgiveness that comes too late. The rain continued to fall on Pittsburgh, as it always had, washing away the old to make room for the new. And somewhere in the city, in a senior center on the east side, An elderly woman was telling this story to a group of retirees, each of them clutching a cup of coffee and nodding at the familiar rhythms of loss and hope. "So what's the lesson?" one of them asked. The woman smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "The lesson is simple. Trust is precious, and once broken, it can never be fully restored. Guard it carefully. Guard your secrets more carefully still. And remember that the people who betray you are not always—" She paused, looking at each face in the room. But the deeper lesson is this: desperation is not an excuse. No matter how great your need, no matter how pure your intentions, the ends do not justify the means. Victor Kowalski loved his daughter more than anything in the world, and that love destroyed him, destroyed her, and nearly destroyed two innocent people who had done nothing wrong. Love without integrity is not love at all. It is just need wearing a disguise. The room was silent for a long moment. Then someone asked, "What happened to the daughter?" "Sophie?" The woman's smile softened. "I'm told she's doing well. She became a social worker, helping other families navigate the medical system so they don't have to face the choices her father faced. She never remarried after her husband. And the gold? The money that was recovered? Most of it went to pay Harold and Margaret's medical bills and living expenses in their final years. The rest was donated to a fund that helps seniors protect themselves from financial exploitation. It seemed fitting, turning the instrument of betrayal into—" The elderly woman finished her coffee and stood to leave. "Remember," she said, turning back at the door, "the most dangerous thief is not the stranger who breaks your window. It's the friend who knows where you hide your keys." She walked out into the Pittsburgh afternoon, where the rain had finally stopped and a pale sun was breaking through the clouds. Somewhere in the city, a church bell rang the hour. Wow. And the story, like all true stories, continued to live in the hearts of those who had heard it, waiting to be told again. Summary of practical tips from the story. Helpful tips: add a pinch of cinnamon to your coffee grounds for better flavor. Pour boiled egg water on houseplants. The minerals help them grow. Rub lemon juice on your hands before cutting garlic or onions to prevent odors. Keep baking soda in your trash can to neutralize bad smells. Store oranges in cold water for an hour before juicing to get 50% more juice. Brush your teeth before meals to naturally reduce your appetite. Warnings, things to avoid. Never store valuables at home without professional security and proper insurance. Never share financial information with anyone outside your immediate family. Ever assume that long friendships protect you from betrayal. Never let fear of banks drive you to make riskier decisions. Never announce your travel plans to people who know where your valuables are. Never sit with your legs crossed for long periods. It damages blood circulation. Meaning never trust institutional security less than personal hiding spots without proper research. The 5 critical mistakes Harold made. 1. He stored gold at home instead of in a professional secure vault. 2. He used an old corroded safe with a weakened lock mechanism. 3. He told his neighbor about the gold while intoxicated. 4. He repeatedly shared his travel plans with the same neighbor. 5. He failed to insure the gold against theft.